July 1944. Normandy. Dawn broke gray and heavy over the hedgerows near St. Lo. Corporal Dieter Schmidt of the Wehrmacht rubbed grime from his eyes and adjusted the strap of his steel helmet. He had survived weeks of fighting in the bocage, ambushes, and sniper fire. But now a new sound filled the air, a low, distant rumble. At first, he thought it was thunder. Then the sky cracked open. Shells screamed overhead, hundreds at once, the earth erupting in fountains of dirt and fire. The ground shook like an earthquake. Trees snapped, bunkers collapsed, and men were hurled into the air like rag dolls. Schmidt flattened himself into the mud, ears ringing. Around him, comrades clutched their heads, shouting prayers, sobbing. The barrage never seemed to end. Hours later, when silence finally fell, entire companies were gone. For Schmidt and thousands of other German soldiers, the terrifying truth had become clear. Americans fought not only with tanks and rifles, but with artillery on a scale that no human spirit could endure. From Normandy to the Ardennes, from the Rhine to the Ruhr, the United States Army relied on one devastating advantage: artillery firepower. The Germans called it Materialschlacht, a battle of materials. They had seen Soviet artillery in the East, but what Americans unleashed in the West was different. It was precise, relentless, and supported by an industrial machine that never ran out of shells. Soldiers expecting short barrages were instead buried under bombardments lasting hours, sometimes days, until entire landscapes disappeared into smoke and craters. The statistics tell the story. During World War II, American industry produced more than 40 million artillery shells of all calibers. By 1944, the U.S. Army in Europe fielded over 200 battalions of artillery, each capable of pouring steel onto German lines at a moment's notice. In Normandy alone, American artillery fired more than 4 million rounds in 2 months. German units, by contrast, often rationed shells, 10 per gun per day, sometimes less, because supply lines were shattered by Allied bombing. The imbalance was crushing. One lesser-known fact shocked German officers most. Americans perfected time-on-target barrages. Dozens of batteries calculated firing solutions so shells from different guns landed simultaneously. There was no warning whistle, no gradual buildup, just instant annihilation. Survivors described the horror. 1 second silence. The next second, the world exploding around them. No man, however brave, could hold position under that. Psychological collapse became inevitable. Diaries of German soldiers in Normandy describe trembling hands, ringing ears, minds shattered by the constant thunder. "We crouched in our foxholes like animals," one wrote. The Americans did not fight men. They fought the earth itself. Others confessed that fear of artillery was greater than fear of tanks or aircraft. Machine gun fire could be faced, even bombers could be avoided. But when the sky rained steel, there was no escape. At St. Lo, entire German regiments were erased. A captured officer admitted, "We never saw their infantry, only shells." At the Battle of the Bulge, German columns advancing through the Ardennes found themselves trapped by American artillery, directed by forward observers hidden in forests. One day alone, U.S. guns fired more than 100,000 rounds into a narrow valley, shredding men and machines. Survivors staggered out, deaf, burned, and broken. Another little-known detail: Americans paired artillery with radar. The SCR-584 radar tracked incoming shells, pinpointing enemy gun positions. Counter-battery fire followed within minutes, silencing German artillery before it could fire a second salvo. Wehrmacht gunners, once proud of their skill, now lived in terror. Each time we fired, one gunner recalled, we knew death would come back to us. The industrial numbers again told the truth. A single American division could call on 72 field guns, plus corps and Army-level artillery behind it. When massed, this meant thousands of barrels firing together. At the Siege of Aachen in October 1944, the U.S. Army unleashed more than 5,000 tons of shells in 1 week. The ancient city crumbled block by block. German defenders inside wrote, "We fought not against men, but against explosions." Even more shocking was the accuracy. Forward observers in light aircraft, nicknamed grasshoppers, directed fire with radios. They circled above battlefields, immune to German attempts to shoot them down, adjusting barrages until rounds landed on exact coordinates. Infantry pinned down by a single machine gun called for fire, and within minutes the gun position was vaporized. German soldiers, who had expected clumsy, random bombardments, realized the Americans could pick off a single farmhouse or trench line at will. The relentlessness of supply made it worse. German troops often cheered when barrages ended, believing the Americans had exhausted their shells. Minutes later, another wave came. By the third or fourth repetition, hope collapsed. Prisoners later admitted surrendering not from lack of courage, but from despair. "There was no end," one said. "We could not live through it again." Even elite formations broke. Panzer Lehr, one of Germany's best armored divisions, lost half its strength in Normandy, not to tank duels, but to American artillery. The panzers never even reached battle before being blasted apart by shells. German commanders, who once believed the tank was king, learned that firepower from unseen guns ruled instead. The human side was brutal. Men buried alive in trenches clawed upward only to be crushed by another shell. Others wandered stunned, deaf, unable to speak. Doctors reported psychological collapse, men shaking uncontrollably, refusing orders, staring blankly. For many, the artillery was worse than death. At least, death ended the noise. By 1945, German soldiers recognized the futility. At the Ruhr pocket, encircled troops endured week-long barrages. When surrender came, thousands of them lined up silently, eyes hollow, uniforms torn, hands raised. One officer told his captor, "Your artillery fought us harder than your men. We never had a chance." For Americans, artillery was the king of battle, a weapon of coordination and mathematics. For Germans on the receiving end, it was hell on earth. They entered bunkers as soldiers and crawled out as broken men. In the end, courage, tactics, even tanks could not withstand the arithmetic of shells. The Americans fought with factories behind them, with endless trains of ammunition, with science that made every gun deadly. For German soldiers, shattered by the relentless barrages, the lesson was bitter and unforgettable. Bravery could not stop steel when it fell from the sky without end.